Doors is a game where nearly all of its features are pretty well executed. Whilst playing the game, I don't usually come across something and feel like it's not living up to the effort that has been put into it. However, there is one feature in Doors which I think is the game's biggest missed opportunity. A threat which, in all honesty, is a really cool concept, but just sort of falls flat when it comes to how it's actually functioning in-game. And that is fire damp. You'd think that a deadly gas that causes explosions would be really cool, but in practice, fire damp is essentially a non-threat, with its only real effect just being to change the color of the room orange. Now, fire damp as a concept is really cool, but I definitely feel that as a threat it should be expanded upon. So in this video, I'm going to be going over why fire damp fails at its intended purpose, why it's important to fix that, as well as some possible solutions to make it act like a better overall hazard in the game. We have got a lot to discuss today, so with all of that being said, let's begin. Alright, so to start, I want to go over what exactly fire damp is. Fire damp is a hazard that was first introduced in the mines. However, it can also spawn in the hotel through modifiers. The way it works is that in certain rooms, fissures will open up in the ground that expel a thick orange gas known as fire damp. This gas is unhealthy to breathe in, meaning if you stay in a room containing it for too long, you will eventually pass out and die. Fire damp is also incredibly flammable, so using any light source involving an open flame, such as a lighter, will cause the gas to ignite and immediately explode you, ending your run. Now, those two functionalities seem pretty effective as concepts, however in practice they are barely utilized at all. For a fire damp to kill you through suffocation, you have to remain in a room containing the gas for a whopping 53 seconds, which is far longer than any amount of time players spend in a single normal room. Additionally, fire damp rarely ever spawns in dark rooms, so most of the time, players don't even need to use a fire-causing light source in those rooms. Lastly, fire damp rooms always have a giant warning sign placed on the door leading up to them, meaning that players are well notified prior to even entering the room that the gas is present, so they can easily be aware just not to use any light source. This supposedly lethal gas isn't deadly at all. It doesn't even constitute a hazard due to how forgiving it is. This is also true for incredibly new players, as apart from the flammability of the gas, which can be learned after at least one death to it, new mines players will just speed through rooms normally like they've done in the hotel, completely negating fire damp's suffocation effect. This is a problem because in terms of the normal rooms you come across in the mines, there are only really 3 new threats that differentiate them from the rooms you find normally in the hotel, those being giggles, gloombats, and fire damp. Given how fire damp fails at being a hazard, it means there really only exists 2 new obstacles in the entirety of the mine's normal gameplay. This can lead to rather uneventful experiences over time for new and old players, as many of the rooms play out exactly like hotel rooms would, they just look a little different. This is why I think fire damp should be reworked to become actually threatening. However, how could that actually be done? Well, by fixing the issues I previously described, as well as adding new features to the gas to make it more interesting, I think fire damp can genuinely become a good hazard. Let's start with the first issue, that being how fire damp's suffocation ability isn't that utilized. As I said, fire damp takes 53 seconds to fully suffocate a player standing in it, which is much longer than anybody, even new players, spend in a single normal room. So, as a solution, that time limit can be shortened to something like 25 seconds. This way, players have to put real thought into how they'll traverse fire damp rooms, as there's a real chance they could just suffocate from the gas. I also think it would be cool if fire damp disoriented the player by providing them with the confusion status effect right before suffocation. Essentially, confusion is a status effect introduced in the 2025 Trick or Treat event, and when applied, it reverses the player's controls. Given how fire damp is meant to intoxicate players, I think if you remain in the gas too long, the status effect would be applied to you a few seconds before you suffocate. This just serves to make the hazard a little bit more tricky to handle, and it seems quite fitting given how taking that much lethal gas should disorient you. Moving on, let's discuss making the flammable aspect of fire damp more versatile. As I said, this hazard explodes anyone who uses a light source involving an open flame within its vicinity. However, very few of these light sources exist in-game, and most of the time fire damp rooms are well lit, so no light source is required at all. To fix this, here are some changes I would make. For one, fire damp will only appear in dark rooms, meaning players are more incentivized to use light sources, which of course would be to trick them into getting killed. Additionally, fire damp would now affect the player if they use any light source in its vicinity, not just ones using an open flame. You see, many gases in real life ignite when a simple spark touches them, so why not add that to fire damp to make them more threatening? Here's how I think it could work. If you use a light source with an open flame in fire damp, such as lighters, candles, or lanterns, then you would explode like you normally do. However, if you use any other light source such as flashlights or bulk lights, then instead you'd be given the fire status effect for a short while. This status effect was in the Trick or Treat 2025 event, and it sets the player on fire, slowly draining away their health. I think implementing this effect into fire damp by applying it to players who use non-open flame light sources could be a good way to make the hazard more dangerous and gameplay affecting. This feature would also act as an in-game explanation as to why fire damp only appears in dark rooms, as rooms with functioning lights would ignite the fire damp. Now, there is still one light source I've yet to discuss which doesn't fall into any category, and that is the glow stick. Glow sticks are the only light source which the player doesn't use whilst holding, as they instead throw it out to light a fixed area. What I'm thinking is that when a player throws a glow stick in a fire damp room, the glow stick would ignite and explode upon reaching the ground, fitting with how all the other light sources cause fire explosions in fire damp. If the player is standing too close to the blown up glow stick, they would receive the fire status effect for a short while. The last thing I want to mention is that using the laser pointer in fire damp rooms would be completely safe, as they barely emit any light and it would act as a way for the item to be more useful. Players will have to learn how to navigate these dark rooms without the use of a light source, whilst not remaining in the room for too long to avoid suffocation. Now, the last issue I want to address is how easily fire damp is to avoid given the prior knowledge the game gives you about it. As I had stated, every single fire damp room has a giant warning symbol on the door leading up to it, meaning players can easily just look at the warning sign and realize they shouldn't use a light source in that room, as well as how they should just walk really fast to completely negate the effects of the suffocating gas. Now, I think these fire damp warning signs should remain on these doors for the first half of the mines. However, for the second half, which is supposed to be harder, I think the warning signs should be completely removed. Now, this doesn't make spotting fire damp before opening the door impossible, as fire damp rooms also leak the gas through the door. So, attentive players can still tell when the next room will contain fire damp by looking to see if any is leaking through the bottom of the door. However, this change just makes it harder for less attentive players to get an easy pass through fire damp rooms. With all of those changes combined, fire damp can become an actual dangerous threat, instead of just a random orange gas that does absolutely nothing. So, with all of that being said, let me know in the comments what you think of these suggestions. Do you think I did a decent job at revamping fire damp to become a threatening obstacle worthy of being in the mines? Or do you feel I went a little overboard and now the hazard is way too dangerous and difficult to handle? If you think the latter, then let me know in the comments how I can improve this suggestion, as I'm always open to new ideas. Either way, I definitely think at some point fire damp should receive some type of rework, as in its current state it feels very underutilized, maybe in a future batch, as all of its potential seems to have been missed, in its current state at least. Anyways, thank you all for watching and I hope you enjoyed.